deadly terrorist acts.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas.
None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
Mr. Houston, say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Welcome to the Hagmann Daily Show, weekdays 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And now your hosts, Joe Hagmann and Jon Robberson.
Hello and welcome to this Thursday, March 22nd, 2018 edition of the Hagmann Daily Show. So glad to be here today. Had an unexpected day off of the Daily Show yesterday. I had to take care of some family things. So great to be back. We got a whole lot to get into. And since we last talked on the Daily Show, the Austin bomber has blown himself up. The only thing I want to say about that is, we did some preliminary profiles just from what we observed, and the guy was younger. And one thing I find interesting about this whole story is there is a 25-minute confession. Apparently, he left, and we have yet to learn what the motive is. And it seems to be out of the news cycle today. I don't know if anybody has seen any articles, except there's one on Drudge. Left 25-minute video, confession, and family of Austin bombing suspect expresses shock. But beyond that, you got the Dow down 500 points right now. You have Donald Trump's lawyer in the special counsel investigation is leaving, and I think this is because Trump brought on some other lawyers to get involved in this as well earlier in the week. So I think this is, kind of shuffling the personnel around. And he brought an attack lawyer on. So we can discuss that. We're going to have Stephen Menking on with us today also. And we're going to discuss this new spending bill that is really raising some concern across the board on the Republican aisle. Rand Paul has said that this is a rotten, terrible way to govern. And he's been saying this with these temporary funding measures. But what's being put forth is a $1.3 trillion spending plan that would put us $1 trillion more in debt. It would keep the government funded. But what we're seeing is all these, pork barrel backroom deals being thrown in here and unnecessary regulations and laws. We're going to talk about some of those. The Cloud Act, which is a big thing that is being talked about. It's supported by major technology, and they say you have to trust Jeff Sessions and Mike Pompeo to defend our human rights. This from the Hill, and we're going to, it's the Clarifying Lawful Overseas Use of Data Act, or Cloud Act, is a bill introduced to establish new standards for when governments want to obtain information stored outside of their jurisdiction. This has to do with your data, your communications.
Joe, can I ask you a favor? Will you just, for the benefit of our listeners and myself as well, will you please reread what the CLOUD acronym stands for? And let's just touch on that for a second.
The Clarifying Lawful Overseas Use of Data Act is what it's called.
Well, that sounds not only lawful and reasonable, but perhaps biblical. I mean, every time they make another tyrannical move, going back to the Patriot Act, they always gussy it up with these euphemisms. And I'm at the point, Joe, where when I read these schmaltzy, benevolent titles, it immediately trips my alarm bells.
Well, listen to this. This is what it is about. They say privacy and human rights organizations have opposed the bill, and they're pointing out that the current human rights protections in favor of vague standards that could gut individual rights. The bill would also strip power away from Congress and the judicial branch, giving Sessions and Pompeo and any future executive branch officials unchecked authority to negotiate data exchanges agreements with foreign nations, regardless of whether they respect human rights or not. And that's a major shift from current law, and one that Congress should reject. But this is, they do this all the time, John. They try to push forward their their legislative agenda and their global governance, their goal of global governance, and they sneak things into other bills, and they do backdoor deals and get this stuff passed. And meanwhile, the Constitution and our Bill of Rights are constantly chipped away at.
You know, this is reminiscent, Joe, of the battle that we witnessed back in early 2016 when the Department of Justice was going up against Apple, trying to unlock the phones. Was it the San Bernardino shooters? Is that who the I believe it was San Bernardino. They were trying to unlock their iPhones. Remember that big legal hootenanny, January 2016?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that it's reminiscent of that. But Joe, we'd be remiss if we didn't also just kind of reiterate the bottom line with Facebook at this time, and it is simply this: when you look at all the articles, the team over at True News has been doing a very good job of covering this over the past several days. The bottom line is, Joe, how much does it cost to be on Facebook per month?
How much does it cost too?
Very nice. It costs $0.00 for a Facebook user to be on Facebook, right?
Unless you want to pay for advertising, yeah.
Right, of course. Unless you and that's a whole nother story, because we could talk about the skewed criteria they have for advertisers. Also, try being, for example, the True Legends conference and advertising on Facebook. But I digress. Joe, it was Facebook took a stock loss of approximately $35 billion by Tuesday, correct?
Yeah, they took a huge hit, and they're down today another 2.76% as of right now. So yeah, they are, and this was earlier in the week. They had a stock price right around 184, 185, and now it has dropped. It is at its current level of 164. So it has seen a significant drop. You
can't even remotely conceive that the amount of money washing back and forth in and out of Facebook quarter by quarter, year in, year out, is coming from advertising dollars. There's no way. They'd have to have every company on the planet advertising on Facebook. They are selling data, and they are, in fact, creating a digital profile.
Oh, they have created
every single. Thank you. They have created a digital profile for every person listening to our program today who is continuing to use Facebook. And again, I want to acknowledge Rick Wiles and the team over at True News for excellent coverage on this. But Joe, we're talking about the potential of integrating a digital profile that in some ways may know you better than you know yourself. And when you combine that with the incredibly quick, the fast advances in AI, it paints a pretty scary picture.
Well, yeah, it does. And we're going to talk with Stephen Menking about Facebook and what he sees moving forward as far as the financial end of things, and as well as the user backlash that we have seen. I want to play a quick clip on this spending bill from Fox and Friends this morning with Congressman Jim Jordan. And I guess it's a 4-minute video, John. Let's just play the whole thing, because they cover this spending bill in depth. And this is from a representative who is working on the bill. And it's a good video. So let's play this in its entirety. Spending bill, the worst I've ever seen. Representative Jim Jordan on Fox and Friends this morning.
All right, Congress racing to avoid a third government shutdown, with the House poised to vote on a $1.3 trillion spending bill. But conservatives, in many cases, not happy, including our next guest. He's steamed. I just talked to him, GOP Congressman of Ohio, Jim Jordan. Congressman, why aren't you happy with this bill specifically? Is it the price tag or what you're spending it on?
It's, well, both. I mean, and it's not even close to what we told the American people we were going to do. So it's not just conservatives who don't like this bill. The American people, when they find out what's in it, and that's going to take a while, because we just got it 12 hours ago, and we're going to vote on it here in a few hours, and it's 2,200 pages that funds sanctuary cities, funds Planned Parenthood, restricts Second Amendment liberties, and grows the government at a $1.3 trillion price tag on this legislation, which will lead to a $1 trillion deficit. Now, I don't think the American people said, oh, let's put Republicans Republicans in control of Congress to do a bill like this. This may be the worst bill I have seen in my time in Congress, the worst bill our leadership's ever allowed to come to the floor.
Well, they're doing it not because they want to do it, because they have to compromise with Democrats who have a totally different feeling about spending than you do.
Yeah, but Brian, the American people didn't elect Democrats to control the United States Congress. They elected Republicans. I don't think we told the voters when we were running for the job and they gave us the privilege to come here and serve that we were going to continue to fund Planned Parenthood. We were going to restrict Second Amendment liberties, let some bureaucrats take away your Second Amendment rights, not a court of law. I don't think they said we were going to fund this gateway earmark boondoggle project and not fund the border wall. I mean, the one thing we don't fund is the one issue we all campaigned on, a border security wall, and that is not in the legislation. So it can't get any worse than this bill. We should stop. We should go back to the drawing board. If we have to do a short-term funding bill, do that. But go back and do something consistent with what the voters elected us to do.
You know, General Mattis has said the Defense Department is suffering big time with these continuing funding bills. He says you guys do give in this bill, I'm sure you're happy about this, everything Mattis wanted. So he gets his $80 billion. He's trying to get up to the levels he was before President Obama took office, and it's been stripped dry. So you're happy with the defense levels. You're just not happy with the other levels.
Of course, because that's what the American people elected us to do. They want our troops to get the pay raise they deserve. They want our military to be the best, like they are, to continue to be the best and have what they need to defend this country. They don't want us to grow government. They don't want us to fund Planned Parenthood. They don't want us to restrict their Second Amendment liberties. They don't want us to give money for the Gateway Tunnel but not give money for the border wall. They don't want those things. So we were so close to winning this.
But you're right. And there was a shutdown before, and it was DACA against this, and you guys won that. But if this is pure spending, the president and the GOP look like they can't govern because, as you know, it's 60 votes in the Senate, and they're not going to change that.
No, Brian, we can have the debate, take the debate to the American people and say, we're going to fund our troops. In fact, we were ready to do this. Chuck Schumer shut the government down a couple months ago. A few weeks later, we sent him a bill that funded the troops for the entire year and gave them the pay raise they needed and held the line on everything else. And instead of just having that debate and winning that debate, right after Chuck Schumer had been embarrassed because he shut down the government, we did what Washington always does. We did the convenient thing. We just increased spending for everything. And now we're taking that increased spending levels that were set a few weeks ago, and we're funding things like Planned Parenthood, continuing to fund Obamacare, continuing to use money to take away people's Second Amendment liberties without getting their day in court. That should never happen in this country. And that's why this bill is so bad. And you're going to see lots of conservatives vote against it because it's not what the American people want.
10 seconds. Why?
All right, that's Jim Jordan. And I don't have to add anything to that. He summed it up so nicely. No funding for the border wall, continuing to fund sanctuary cities, continuing to fund Planned Parenthood, and on and on and on. You heard him, and he's exactly right. This is a terrible bill, and should President Trump sign it? Well, see, this is the problem. Instead of sitting down and hammering out just a spending bill, as we said before, they throw in all these extra bills and projects and, well, if you want me to vote for it, Mr. President, you have to add a, $10 million waterfront project to the bill for my district. And that's what they do. And they bloat and bloat. And, half the people, I'm sure more than half the people that vote on this bill are probably going to line their pockets with this money. And then the kickbacks and on and on and on. So this just constant corruption, basically holding the government hostage for lining the pockets of corrupt politicians, and this is going to continue. This is just another notch in the implosion of our economy.
Well, it's holding, I agree with your commentary, Joe, it's holding we the people, the taxpayers, hostage. It's really effectively a gun to our heads. Try not paying your taxes. See what happens. Yeah. So, I've had my eye on Jim Jordan for a while, and I'm grateful for people like Congressman Jordan. Joe, this is from Washington Post, and I'll burn through this quickly, but I want our listeners to pay close attention to the verbiage here. This is per the spending bill. It's titled, "Here's What Congress is Stuffing into Its $1.3 Trillion Spending Bill," by Mike DeBonis, Ed O'Keefe, and Erica Werner, posted today. Skipping down about mid-article, border wall. The bill provides $1.6 billion for barriers along the U.S.-Mexico border, but with some serious strings attached. Of the total, $251 million is earmarked specifically for secondary fencing near San Diego, where fencing is already in place. $445 million is for no more than 25 miles of, quote, levee fencing, end quote.
Wait, 400 million?
45 million
45
for levee, as in like a water levee, L-E-V-E-E, levee fencing. I just can't help but think of the little dirt puddle trickle that is the Rio Grande. It goes on to say, and the rest is for planning, design, and technology, not for wall construction. The biggest, and I got to give Washington Post credit for this, the biggest catch is this: the barriers authorized to be built under the act must be, quote, operationally effective designs, end quote, already deployed as of last March, meaning none of President Trump's big, beautiful wall prototypes can be built. Give me one more second here, Joe. It goes on to discuss immigration enforcement. The bill bumps up funding for both U.S. Customs and Border Protection and for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, delivering increases sought by the Trump administration. But there are significant restrictions on how that new money can be spent. Democrats pushed for and won limitations on hiring new ICE interior enforcement agents. I'm saying, this is my opinion, think sanctuary cities. And on the number of undocumented immigrants the agency can detain. Can you believe this? They want to put a provision on how many immigrants ICE can detain.
Yeah.
In conclusion, under provisions written into the bill, ICE can have no more than 40,354 immigrants in detention by the time the fiscal year ends in September.
Wow, imagine if they had those same quotas for our federal prison instead of the reverse way that they do it, mandating that X amount of people are in the prisons. Imagine if they did that, with our prison system. But no, illegal aliens obviously are getting preferential treatment because this is the liberal fantasy utopia world that they're trying to create here, without any borders or culture. No white people, on and on and on. So. I'm so sick of this, John. These people are. This is exactly what Jim Jordan said. This is not why the American people elected a Republican Senate, House, and President, was to give concessions to the Democrats who only care about destroying our country.
Yeah,
and some Republicans as well.
You just analyzed down to a precise point what's put a bee in my bonnet regarding this entire thing, is that it has never been more evident in all of the years, Joe, that I've personally paid attention to politics. And I was a goofy teenager. I was into politics even as a teenager. The Democrats, the DNC, and I'm sorry if the handful of labor Democrats, blue dog Democrats that are still out there, God bless you, but the DNC is destroying this country. And I can't imagine a cogent argument otherwise. I've never heard something so ludicrous in my life as to place 40,354. That's the number. If you get to 40,355, well, you can talk to Kate Steinle's family about that.
Yeah, and this is part of the catch and release programs that we've seen that are so detrimental. And we saw, just last thing on the immigration, we talked about the mayor of Oakland and how she warned the illegal immigrants of an incoming ICE raid. And we posted this on Hagmann Report a few days ago, but we never talked about it, that 3 of those illegal aliens that she warned who were able to escape the raid have been picked up on other criminal violations that they have committed just since she warned them. So they were already from domestic violence to DUIs and assault and batteries. You have basically. So did she obstruct justice, and should she be held accountable? Absolutely.
She you know what? She should face charges, Joe. At the end of the day, regardless, and really, again, for any of our left-leaning listeners out there, all 3 of them, but also for all of the people choosing to join us from the UK and all over, this is a simple case of an individual placed in a leadership position over one of the well-recognized cities in the country and putting federal law enforcement's lives at danger. I mean, it's almost beyond comprehension.
I mean, imagine this is like a police officer tipping off a drug house that there's gonna be a raid tomorrow, so make sure you clear out your personnel and anything you don't want to get confiscated. That's a crime, and that was an example used by one of the head of ICE, I think, the other day.
Joe, I'm going to hand it back to you and take my blood pressure.
Well, okay, that sounds good. No, let's this spending bill. So we're gonna put this with Facebook aside for when Stephen Mencken comes on, because we're gonna get his thoughts on this. Everybody, go to HagmannReport.com. If you aren't familiar with the site, that's HagmannReport.com. Peter Chowka has a new article up. As 60 Minutes approaches, Stormy Daniels' lawyers speaks to Fox News. Now, we have, and we always talk about CNN and the liberal media, and even Fox News to a great extent. I'm getting so sick and tired of Fox News playing, the good guys, like they do support Trump, but they're very condescending, and it's bad. And I don't know how many people saw Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters issue a quitting or a resignation letter as an analyst to Fox News for over 20 years. And we got an email when we read his quote on Hagmann Report about, I hope you're not, mocking Colonel Peters. He's a born-again Christian. And, okay, that's fine and good. But this guy is essentially saying that President Trump is guilty and the Steele dossier is accurate and Fox News is trying to spin it to cover it up and all this. Regardless if he's a Christian or not, he's dead wrong. And, go if you don't want to be at Fox News. I wouldn't want to be there either. But don't try to say, don't buy into this phony conspiracy theory. Fox News is a propaganda outlet, just like MSNBC, CNN, and the other mainstream media. But the only thing Fox News does different is plays to the right base. And it is still a propaganda machine, and there are still good journalists there. But don't try to tell me that Robert Mueller is onto something with this investigation.
Well, Joe, I bet a lot of our listeners, myself included, would have perhaps taken maybe not offense, but issue with the statement you just made. And yet we see here in early 2018 that it is the truth. It's infotainment to a great degree, not to detract from people like Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, who I think are doing very, very good editorializing, etc. I even enjoy Tucker Carlson. However, Peter Barry Chawka's most recent piece is definitely worth taking a look at, if for no other reason, and again, not to detract from Peter's work, but I can't imagine that America is hanging on the precipice of uncertainty based on Stormy Daniels and what she could have possibly revealed to Anderson Cooper. Meanwhile, over at abcnews.go.com, fired FBI official authorized criminal probe of Sessions, sources say. Exclusive. And I'll just give you the first piece because, Joe, I know you're going to unpack this for a moment. But it goes on to say, nearly a year before Attorney General Jeff Sessions fired senior FBI official Andrew McCabe for what Sessions called a, quote, lack of candor, which interestingly, Sessions is actually using candor in choosing those words. McCabe oversaw a federal criminal investigation into whether Sessions lacked candor when testifying before Congress about contracts with Russian operatives. Sources familiar with the matter told ABC News. Joe?
Well, yeah, this is an interesting story. So Andrew McCabe opens an investigation into Jeff Sessions over his confirmation hearing, his testimony on his confirmation hearing, and thinking that he has lied to investigators about his Russian connections. And if you remember his testimony, he just talked about how he found himself at the same table as some Russian lobbyist or government official, and had actual other meetings, Senate meetings, or meetings that were purposeful to his job at the time with Russian officials, and they tried to spin it into this big conspiracy. And everybody knows this big hoax, this witch hunt, political witch hunt, which is the Russia investigation, is garbage. There's no evidence there. Even the indictment of a few Russians who will never see extradition and never be charged about how they purchase ads and had Americans buy into their social media messages, which were the same as other Americans who were supporting President Trump. It had no influence. Or, I mean, this whole thing's a joke. I don't even have to go into the details at this point. But
quickly, let's give a tip of the hat to Jack DeSobic, Hagmann Report regular contributor. He tweeted out 2 days ago, Mueller agrees with the House Intelligence Committee report of no collusion as well. That is why he has moved on to other lines of inquiry, such as obstruction and pre- or post-election activities of campaign associates. Witch hunt, so says Jack DeSobic on Twitter.
Yeah, and he's exactly right. It is a witch hunt, and they had moved. It was Russian hacking, then it was collusion. Now it's obstruction of justice, and they're going to try to bring the Stormy Daniels into it and look at money laundering, and it's insane.
Real quick, Joe, not to be redundant, but this is so ludicrous that we really need to reiterate it. What about what you reported late last week about Mueller supposedly utilizing this arcane law from 1948?
Yeah, the conspiracy against the United States government, which needs no underlying criminal offense, just needs other people involved in some conspiracy against the best interest of the United States, and that can include, deceiving, being lied to. The definition is very open to interpretation. So again, I believe they are moving and will attempt to charge President Trump with obstruction of justice, and I think it's just going to be a big political circus. The American people don't buy it. Most of the people on the left don't even buy it at this point. It's just the fanatical, mentally disturbed Hillary hopefuls that are left out there that still believe in some alternative universe that President Trump is going to be impeached and Hillary Clinton will be placed atop her rightful place in the United States, which is that of the presidency, which will never happen.
Question, Joe. I agree. It is to quote Steve Quayle, it is circus ridiculous. That's one of my favorite Quayle quotes of all time. Question, Joe. Is this ongoing investigation, all of this vitriol against the president, is it affecting the leftist, low information, no information voters to the degree that perhaps we're starting to see some very serious negative effects vis-a-vis the Austin bombing issue?
Well, they're trying to paint the Austin bomber as a Christian conservative when he did post on the internet that he believes he was this was from 2012 when he was a junior in high school. So this was 7 years ago, where he talked about he believed he was a conservative but didn't have enough facts to support his argument, and they said he was pro guns, anti-abortion. You mean he's constitutionally minded? Maybe not. Was he a Christian? Well, one of the differences between Christianity and Islam, I don't know, John, that you can call yourself a Christian while killing indiscriminately.
Okay, yeah, that's an excellent point. Quick story, 30 seconds. My grandpa Roberson served in World War II. Both my grandfathers did. And Joe, he was already interested in the ministry. He'd grown up in a Pentecostal Christian family in Arkansas. He tried desperately to get conscientious objector status. Now, this is after Pearl Harbor. I mean, this is World War II. He wound up being a medic, but he took the Ten Commandments seriously, like to the letter of the law. So absolutely, the idea for any conservative Christians out there that you have the divine right to take up arms or commit acts of violence, whether it's against an abortion doctor, quote unquote, or any other violent sort of pushback, is just completely anti-biblical.
And what we see online here, the Huffington Post, FBI agents and the internet agree the Fed should call terrorism what it is. Whenever a white non-Muslim man commits an act of mass violence, not an infrequent occurrence in recent history, the online debate begins. Why aren't authorities calling this terrorism? and to some extent, I wouldn't agree with the racial components, but what the Austin bomber did is terrorism. It's domestic terrorism. But you have to understand there's a line between, the jihad terrorism and the domestic terrorism. And real quick, they're calling this guy a radical Christian terrorist. And what's interesting is, unlike Islam, which they refuse to even acknowledge is behind so many terror attacks and violence, Islam actually promotes that violence, whereas in Christians, no Christian group has ever promoted or helped or trained or wanted to inflict damage on another group of individuals. So it's not part of the teaching.
please save the emails. We don't need a primer on the Crusades that happened 600 years ago out of the Roman Catholic Church. Joe, before we bring on Steve,
I mean, the medieval times and the persecution. Obviously, the Christian Church has been involved in persecution, but the Vatican, I would argue, is not even is gone so far away from the doctrine of in the Gospels that it's not even really Christian itself.
You know, we're going to need to devote a show in the near future to the comment that you just made, Joe, because there's so much there.
And I'm not saying Catholics aren't Christians. I'm saying the institution of the Catholic Church itself.
You know, I read a book, and I will make a note of it here and shag the title for either tomorrow's broadcast or Monday. I read a fantastic book a couple years ago about Martin Luther and about where the Vatican was with their doctrine and their political ideology during Luther's day. And it was incredibly fascinating. Indulgences and all these just crazy things that you can peruse the 66 books from Genesis to Revelation, and you're not going to find a lot of this just completely misguided doctrine. Real quick, before we bring on Stephen Minking, who joins us today, Thursday, since we were absent yesterday. But this is just too good to pass up, Joe. This from yahoo.com. Trump, crazy Biden would go down crying if he assaulted me. And I just can't let this go. I've got to share it with everybody. Washington. President Donald Trump lashed out at Joe Biden for wanting to, quote, beat the hell out of him, end quote, saying Thursday that the former vice president, quote, would go down fast and hard, crying all the way. The Republican president tweeted, quote, crazy Joe Biden is trying to act like a tough guy. Actually, he is weak, both mentally and physically, and yet he threatens me for the second time with physical assault. He doesn't know me, but he would go down fast and hard, crying all the way. Don't threaten people, Joe.
Yeah, that's up on Hagmann Report with a picture of Biden and both Trump with their fists up. And I do believe President Trump would beat up Joe Biden. And Joe Biden, it's funny to read what he said. When a guy who ended up becoming our national leader said, I can grab a woman anywhere and she likes it. And they asked me if I would like to debate this gentleman. I said, no. I said, if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him. And what's so funny about this is the same former vice president, who has countless YouTube videos of him out there. I would say, I don't want to say groping, inappropriately touching. I don't know. Being very creepy, as they say. Creepy Joe Biden, touching little kids.
Yeah, groping might be a shade too far, but it's pretty close. And if our listeners haven't seen those pictures, they're all over Twitter. Any search engine will bring it right up. I know we've got Steven standing by, but God bless President
bring
Trump.
him on.
And not only that, but one last comment on this. Can you believe, Joe, that in 2018 we're actually privy to? We are witnessing the former vice president and the president threaten to beat the crap out of each other.
Well, this is good. We've had former politicians duel it out with guns before, so I wouldn't be opposed to a cage match to see the president and former vice president go at it. It would be funny, but again, Joe Biden is, why are these people still getting news and airtime? Why are Hillary Clinton still being, promoted all over, or at least part of what she says being put out all over the news? They ignore the falling and breaking of bones and whatnot. But,
well, I'm putting $5 on El Presidente.
But we do have Stephen Minking with us. And Stephen, we were just talking about the Twitter battle between Joe Biden and President Trump. But before that, we were talking about this spending bill. We played a clip of Jim Jordan and his take on this $1.3 trillion bill, and also Rand Paul's take on it, and talked about some of the provisions that are inside of it. And this thing is so bloated and full of waste and kickbacks and whatnot. Do you think the president should sign it?
Well, that's a really good question, Joe. Thanks for having me again on the Hagmann Daily Show. I really do appreciate the time here with you guys. If it were up to me, I would say that in order to restore the accountability of our government, then we need to for me, I wouldn't sign it just because of the way that the process has gone. Okay, like I understand politics as usual, but we need to put an end to the era the swamp style era of getting bills that are multiple thousands of pages long and giving our elected representatives only a extremely short window to read them before they're passed. And so all of this is tactics and gaming and wonkery and everything else. And obviously it looks like the trade-off here was the Republicans get the boost to military spending and the Democrats get everything else. And so the question is that trade-off worth it? As for me, I've seen multiple different arguments. One interesting thread is that when we look at the overall size of the deficits and the national debt, we know intrinsically that that's not and can never be paid down under any sort of status quo operation relative to just cutting spending and everything else like that. There are certain built-in spending increases that apply, and that whenever you try to go against those sorts of things, then you're politically toxic because you're taking away resources that have been promised to people, even if you say that, okay, for these programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, we need to decrease the rate of growth that's built into these programs. Even that is an offense that can be parlayed into political leverage to deny people a return to Washington. And I mean, fair enough. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at a system that ultimately needs to be gutted from the inside out. And to the extent that we continue to be profligate, that gutting is going to take place sooner rather than later. So on one side, you could look at this as, should this bill go into effect, just another in a sequence of fiscally irresponsible decisions that will take us towards the end of the current fiat U.S. dollar-denominated world currency regime and into something else. And what that something else is has yet to be determined. So if we're looking at it purely from the perspective of this is passing this spending bill would not line up with the campaign promises of both the president and his supporters, as well as the legislators who are in the Freedom Caucus, and they're, go ahead, vote against it. I mean, fair enough. It would be almost impossible for me justifying a vote for this bill, in part because I think we need to make the military more efficient and not just throw extra money at it. Of course, people who are serving our country need and deserve to be taken care of properly, but there are more appropriate ways to do it. And I mean, frankly, gentlemen, if I were in charge, I might just pass an executive order that says, like, watch out, I'm going to veto anything that comes to my desk that's longer than 10 pages, right? It's just ridiculous at this point.
Stephen, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your flexibility this week in your schedule. I know we appreciate it, and so do the listeners. This reminds me of a very crucial moment in 2011. This from Rense.com, Jeff Rense's website. And of course, this was all over the media back then. In 2011, economist Kyle Bass interviewed a senior member of the Obama administration about its planned solutions for fixing the U.S. economy and trade deficit. Among the questions he asked was about U.S. exports and wages. But the questions themselves were not nearly as important as the response he received from the senior administration official. In fact, this single 7-word response clarifies everything, explains everything, and leaves little else to discuss. Quote, "We're just going to kill the dollar," end quote. Stephen?
Yeah, and that's ultimately the plan anyway, and it seems like that is the plan of both the hypothetical good guys and the hypothetical bad guys, in that in any case, the question is going to be who controls the next system, because this system has run its course in terms of being able to sustain the lid on inflation. Like, we're seeing it in all sorts of different areas, but it hasn't crept out into the final stages of a Weimar Republic kind of moment. So can we sustain the dollar? Can we sustain that as a world reserve currency? Well, we know that we can't do that indefinitely, and we're stretched to the brim right now. But here's what I would say. I think more relevant contribution I can make that goes sort of beyond the back and forth of, oh, it's horrible campaign promises, or the patriotism aspect of funding the military and everything else like that. Like, let's go beyond the standard political talking points for a second and ask a particular question. If you're upset about this spending bill, what on earth are you going to do about it? Are you going to do something about this right now? Well, yeah, this is exactly my point. So for people who are outraged about this, and I would agree, there are outrageous things in here that we don't want and that we could rightly complain about. But is the complaining going to translate to anything? What actions are you going to take? Are you going to actually call people? Are you going to actually write letters? Are you actually going to motivate putting some political pressure onto these people who bring these bills up repeatedly? Are you going to vote these people out of office? Are you going to demand term limits? Are we going to see a renaissance of the small government Tea Party style movement that was so effective that it had to be co-opted? Are we going to be smarter this time? Are we going to really press and organize and take matters into our own hands through the form of making our political voices known even amidst the climate of censorship? Are we going to continue to press in, or are we going to simply do what's normal, complain a little bit, and then roll over and have nothing come of it? Because draining the swamp isn't just something that we can outsource to one particular man at the top or presumed top of a particular hierarchy. The swamp is everywhere. It's not just in D.C., even though that is one of the nexus points. It's in Hollywood. It's in Wall Street. It's in Middle America. It's everywhere. And that's in part because of the definitive distribution of people, influencers, networks, politicians, everything else. But we can sit back and we can gripe and we can armchair quarterback and say, well, we can't be doing this, or it's too bad we're doing this. But in reality, where is the actual political pressure coming from? Where is everyone? Where is the silent majority? Because they're not so silent anymore, but they're being silenced again as we move through. So my motivation and my point here that I'm trying to make to all of our listeners, and this is an incredible audience that you have here on the Hagmann Daily Show and on the Hagmann Report generally as a platform. It's not to get angry and get rash and make bad decisions. It's to get tactical, to communicate, to organize, and to apply the necessary political pressure. People are individuals, blackmailed, compromised, or not. They will respond to political pressure. And if the political pressure doesn't work in one area, try a different one. Try a different approach. Try 10 approaches at once and we'll see what sticks. Now, part of the issue here is that plenty of us have jobs. We have families to provide for. We have bills to pay. We have all of the cares and necessities of day-to-day life that prevent us from doing what we might want to do. But each and every one of us is going to have to make a contribution. I've been saying this for a couple of years now, that we all need to stand up, and like Coach Dave Daubenmire often says, we all need to play our positions. And so let this be a bit of a clarion call to say, now is the time, if you've never taken myself or any of the other people in the alternative media who make this point up on the suggestion that it's time to take an inventory of the time that you spend during the course of your week. And if you can't find an extra hour in that, then God bless you. You're already working everything beyond your capacity. But if you can make a sacrifice, if you can put away something that can be traded in for something more productive, then you can make a difference. Even 1 hour a week, even 2 hours a week, and all of us, if we're being actually honest with ourselves, which is a difficult enough prospect in and of itself, would be able to recognize that each one of us has some extra time that we could use and apply more productively, whether it's consuming entertainment that we know supports the people who don't share our ideology, or something, or anything else, And so this is not to beat people down or anything else. This is to encourage people that the only way that we are going to make a difference is if we make a difference. And so if we just sit down and expect everything to happen in and of its own accord, yes, there are machinations that are playing out and are likely to play out. But if we're not in the position to put the right kind of pressure on to see the outcomes that we want, then how dare we get outraged when we've done nothing about it? Gentlemen?
No, you're exactly right. And it's like sitting around your house waiting for your dishes to do themselves. They're not going to. And if you sit around and expect everybody else to chip in and do stuff, but yet you're not the one doing the things yourself, then that's a huge problem. And we need to find what our priorities are and what we really want, and make sure that we take the time and have the drive to go after those things. And you're exactly right, Stephen. Nothing comes easy, and the effort, the trying, this all has to be done by each and every one of us to a great degree. And it might be an inconvenience. It might take away from your time, from whatever, but it's necessary if you really value and treasure the freedoms and the way that this country has been for the last 250 years, 45 years since its inception. So it doesn't come easy. You have to fight for it.
Absolutely. And Joe, I would supplement this by saying this feels like such a daunting prospect because it seems like the problem is too big and that there's so much effort that's required that how could any one of us or how could any group of us ever possibly hope to make a difference in this sort of thing? And for one, we rebuke that lie in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. That is a lie of the enemy that prevents us from maintaining the right kind of posture and the right kind of position in these critical times. Here's the solution. It's simple, it's biblical, and it works because God is faithful and his word is true and his promises will never fail. So if you don't know what to do, ask God. He will tell you. You will get that direction from the word, from the Holy Spirit. If you don't feel like you're capable of it, good, you're not. You don't have it in your own strength. None of us do. I certainly don't. But God is willing and able and ready to give us the strength that we need to make a difference for his kingdom if our motives are correct and our heart is set on him. And so we need to take an inventory of our time to figure out what we can put away. We need to take an inventory of our spiritual significance and our standing and our relationship with God, because if we can't hear that still small voice, then we're going to hear about a thousand other voices, and they're all going to lead us in the wrong direction. And that's including our own voice that tells us exactly what we want to think. But there's a way that seems right to a man, but the path thereof leads to death. And so we're in a situation where if we don't have the strength, and we don't, God will give it to us. If we don't have the plan, and we don't, God will give it to us. And if we lean on our own understanding, we are destined to fall, as we've been continuing to fall and to fail for decades now, to set things right, to restore righteousness to our republic, and to see a proper kind of life. And so for those of us who are sort of accustomed and trapped in the trappings of this world, it can seem like, well, that's an awful lot of effort. Even if I might want to do something, like how could I even manage it? You can get the strength from God, but not only that, when you start to do things that are incumbent upon you as a Christian and that are in alignment with righteousness, when you start to do those things, you will begin walking in a life that is filled and suffused with meaning and purpose. And that is what gives us the positive emotion, the physiological kickback, so to speak, so that we can keep going. Do you feel like you're beaten down and trodden under and everything else? Fair enough. Plenty of people are suffering and dealing with tragedies and different things that are difficult to even articulate because they're so terrible. But nonetheless, God will give you the strength, and if you will stand up and begin to follow him and change the aspects of your life and put your own house in order, then we can organize ourselves and make a significant difference. It is persistence, it is meticulousness, it is pressing into God that will give us the energy quite frankly, to deal with these sorts of things. People have been beaten down and bombarded from all angles at all times. And so it's an interesting thing that a certain spending bill from the government is enough to put me into a kind of situation where I'm calling for these sorts of things. But these are the solutions, and how dare we try and implement something more complicated in our own rationality when what is sitting before our eyes, if we have eyes to see it, is incredibly simple, even more powerful, much more dynamic, and is reliant upon the only one who has the power and the resources to give us what we need in order to take things back for the kingdom of God and for the sake of righteousness. Because otherwise, if we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, then how dare we sit down and moan and gripe and everything else like that? It ruins our spirit, it ruins our heart. If there is a problem, and there is, and it's serious, and it's going to affect you and your children, then do something about it. And the solutions are not to withdraw into yourself, but rather, and not to succumb to bitterness and anger and hatred and envy and everything else like that. That's all just another trap. What we need to do is press into God, start making small changes in our lives right now that add up to big changes, start connecting with people, start praying and seeking God, start hearing from God directly, that we could begin to work something and be used of God to transform this nation back into a place where there is some semblance of righteousness. Can we get there? Not on our own laurels, not on our own merit, not on our own track record. We don't have any of those. We're sitting before the Red Sea, but God is willing and able to part it for us if we would give him honor and praise and seek his face while we are still looking at this storm, while we are still looking at the obstacles that we face. Is God able or not? That's the bottom line.
And there it is. Stephen Minking coming in hot on the Hagmann Daily Show today. Stephen, I'll take two of whatever you had this morning. But excellent commentary, very on point. And I know you have limited time today, Stephen, and we're running out of time here as well. But please take 2-3 minutes and tell our listeners, as personally as you care to, when you and I met a couple of years ago, you didn't really have as many irons in the fire as you do today. Now, in the beginning of your commentary, you were exhorting everyone, as Coach Dave often says, to get in the game and play your position. Let's use this as a segue, Stephen. Tell our listeners the various platforms and the outlets that God has blessed you with, everything from your testimony at Times Square Church, a little bit on Amateur Society, and on The Objective.
All right, I'll try and keep this as brief as I can because there's some fantastic plot lines and everything else that's going on here. The Memorialist Story is, before I start out, that if you seek God and ask him to open the doors that need to be opened and to close the doors that need to be closed, then you would be shocked to see where he will take you and what he will equip you with, and just the people he would bring into your life. And so when I got saved, when I came to Christ in May of 2014, I immediately got fired from my job in finance. And so I spent a few minutes and calling out to God, and then a few months trying to figure out what I was going to do next from a career perspective. But in the meantime, I founded a weekly philosophy discussion group called the Amateur Society because I was starving for meaningful conversation. I had it with the trite discussions and popular culture and what's the weather like and everyone complaining all the time. And so I just wanted to ask these bigger questions that had really piqued my interest and had been the motivating factor for me to turn from my agnosticism, figure out that it was appropriate to believe in God, and then to find, much to my surprise, that Christianity was true and worth believing in. And so I founded the Amateur Society in 2014, and then I started to consume all sorts of different media content, including content from the Hagmann Report and True News and a variety of other sources. And it was in the midst of doing all of this different research that it came time for Hear the Watchman in March of 2016 in Dallas, where I met John, and we had my wife and I invited him to join us for dinner at an Applebee's, and so we got introduced there. And then John brought me on to Brothers on the Wall to provide my sort of ex-Wall Street perspective on the financial system, which was hot and heavy in terms of the 2015-2016 kind of time frame. We're seeing some glimpses of that with Deutsche Bank stock being back in the news, but they've managed to hold it together with paper and pins and computer wires for now. So we'll see how that ultimately plays out. But in that time frame, we also looked into starting our own platform, and so we had Pastor Mike with us and Sergeant Tim with us, and we started On the Objective to try and provide this insider platform for the remnant body of Christ, where we weren't necessarily talking about news, but we were trying to cover things from a wide variety of different angles and perspectives, just to, in a collaborative environment, try to manage that. All the while I was going to Times Square Church, and so I was talking with them about applying my skills as a private tutor, which is the profession that I ended up in, into teaching a class there. So I started working with one of the maintenance employees on reading, very, very low key, just working with him once a week, so never despise humble beginnings. We launched On the Objective. We started recording podcasts at the beginning of 2017 and had an awesome year. And thanks to all of these different connections and doors that God opened up, we've been able to interview tons of awesome people from around the campfire. In September of 2017, we went to Branson to the True Legends Conference, had a wonderful meal with Doug, and we're pleased to meet everyone, said hello to the folks at Whispering Ponies Ranch out at Tom Horn's property and everything else like that. That was a fantastic time of fellowship. We try to go to one conference a year, and so in 2018, it's going to be the Occupy conference in Ohio coming up here next month. And then in December of this past year, one of my friends approached me about managing a cryptocurrency portfolio. So now I'm doing that in addition to tutoring, in addition to podcasting and everything else. And I just turned 30, and I'm married, and I'm living my life, but I'm living it for the cause of Christ and for the sake of others. And so I'm getting up earlier. I have more energy to complete the tasks, and God is willing and able to provide, even despite various sorts of obstacles and setbacks and everything else. So I went from being out of a job with nothing really on my plate to do to being so busy that I have to turn away different opportunities, while nonetheless having the flexibility to be able to appear on fantastic programs like this to speak about these things, all the while being prepared by God with extra practice. And Lord knows I need a lot of reps on this with my speaking and my ability to articulate and to speak into other people's lives. And one of the most valuable aspects for me is as a function of a tutor, working with children and kids and high schoolers, and seeing how they think and how they grow and what's necessary. And I have some interesting ideas about what God might do through my life in that capacity later. Ultimately, one of the things I have, this isn't a word from God about a direction to go, but I would really love to be able to provide a platform where Christian homeschoolers and anyone really could access top-notch tutoring services free of charge. And so we'll see how that plays out and everything. But John, that's the major points of what's happening. I've been privileged to run through some proofreading for a couple different books. I'm helping Pastor Spalding with his latest effort. It's just an incredible thing, and what God
Steve,
will give you is just incredible.
I don't mean to be rude, but give people your websites and your Twitter handle, if you would, please.
On the Objective is the best place for everything. ontheobjective.org, and just type in On the Objective into YouTube or Twitter. That's the best way to stay up to date with everything that's going on, including my weekly philosophical discussion group, the Amateur Society. And if you have a question for me, just send me an email, ontheobjective@gmail.com. Do my best to stay on top of everything and to get back to people. I love interacting, answering questions, and everything else like that. So it really is an incredible journey that God will put you on if you dedicate your heart to serving him and to asking him what you should do and where you should go, and to give you the faith and the strength to equip you for that journey. And that it's incumbent upon all of us to do that now, because we need millions more who are willing to give of themselves for others and to stand in this critical time.
Very well said, Stephen, and thank you for coming on. And I know you've taken us to the very end of the show, and I know that wasn't the plan. John said you only had a few minutes, but I want to thank you for doing that, because it was a very inspiring and insightful message, and I think it was very timely as well, and we all needed to hear it. And put the words into action, attempt to accomplish what you never thought you could. And it's a simple, I've noticed in my life, once you apply yourself, you can. You never know what you can get done. If you don't try it, you're never going to accomplish it. At least if you try it, you can say you did. But we have to have that attitude and the motivation to always have that action and behavior instead of just the lip service. We are at the end of the show. Stephen Menking, thank you so much. John, thank you so much. It was a very quick hour, but we will be back here tomorrow. Is Michael Snyder coming on, John? Did we get a confirmation?
No confirmation as yet. He is aware of the invitation, so it remains to be determined.
Okay, and also our sponsor, simplycleanfoods.net. The promo code to use is Simply Clean. And tomorrow, John and I will take at least 5 minutes to talk about our sponsor and the promo code and what that offers. We'll be back then.
The Hagmann Daily Show is brought to you by the Hagmann Report. Tune in to the Hagmann Report weekdays, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to HagmannReport.com. That's HagmannReport.com.